Welcome to Charts This Week. My name's David Linton. I run Updata, and this week's edition for Monday the 18th of January 2016 comes to you from London. And we start with the oil price. It's been in the news, fell below 30 last week. In fact, back in August, we told clients when oil was in the high 50s, we said watch for oil into the low 30s, maybe even the 20s. So we are where we said we would be. So we sent out an email on Friday just reminding clients to re-look at that long-term report, and we've had quite a few people come back say, so where is the bottom? Just tell us. So it's very difficult to call where the bottom is on crude at the moment, but if we start by looking at the charts, it's really difficult to see where the bottom is whilst we're in this position. And one of the things about a bottom is it's only really easy to spot it retrospectively. Calling the bottom or calling the top of a market is really a mug's game. But this, what we saw in August, where we saw this sharp rise, this bear squeeze, don't be surprised to see that kicking in sometime fairly soon. And it's hard to say where it will be exactly or when it will be, but we are approaching territory where the market is overly bearish. And of course there's lots of bad news in the market. And so the question you have to ask yourself as a technician is, what new bad news could enter that we don't already know about? And here we see lots of people citing Iran and all sorts of things, but the fact is that we've been below the cloud on the price ever since June last year when we did call this this move, and until we get back above the cloud, it's too difficult to say where the bottom is. But we are in a bearish frame in the medium term. Remember, that's a daily chart, so we think in the medium term. But the chart that we really do focus on at the moment is this seasonality chart, and I don't really believe that this is the bottom for the oil price, but what I do believe is that sometime soon we will see some bullishness kicking into the price like we see in most Q1s first half of the year. It used to be the summer driving season, the first half of the year. It's now a bit less long than that. It's really just the first quarter. So this should be a strong period for oil prices that we're entering into. So don't be surprised to see a recovery in the price and then a fall away to making new lows later in the year. So in terms of where is the bottom, it depends on which bottom, and this is the key thing. There's 1, 2, 3 bottoms in this. Just in this last year we had 3 bottoms. We probably will see a bottom quite soon. It's likely to be in the next few weeks. Whether it's going to be at these levels or lower levels is still quite difficult to say, and we'll have a look at the charts for the targets in a minute. But the key thing is that quite soon we shouldn't be surprised to see some bullishness coming into the price. And if we look at in fact we can look at the daily chart. The key thing is, of course, when prices are tending to zero, there's not much room to go. Now Shift T on the point and figure chart, this is the quarter cent chart, had a downside target when we were in the mid 40s of 30.25. Now we've exceeded that target and that is bearish, but if we look at the 60-minute chart, it's going to give us a little bit more granularity. We are below the cloud here. This chart is going to be the key. This is when we will know when we've got a turnaround. This is the key on this chart. And if we remember back to that August period, we bounced back up through on the 60-minute chart, and so that is going to be the real key here. And so at the moment we need to get back above $31 on Brent crude and hold that for a few hours, and that would give us a bullish turnaround. If we go on for a few more days, that's going to then be $30, then $29.50. As time goes on, this level is changing, but as soon as we start to turn through this cloud and hold it for a few hours, then we're quite possibly are seeing the beginnings of a bottom. The other thing to watch for is the point and figure targets. On your Updata system, press the Shift key, down, press T, and it gives you the trends and targets. And we do have this downside target of 28 that was given at 30.50. We're now near that. 27.35 is another target. We do have now a new downside target of 22.15. So that is pretty worrying, that we are seeing these downward thrusts and then moves below the bottom of the thrust, so i.e. not really forming a proper bottom there. So at the moment, what we'd be looking for the clear signs of a bottom is a turnaround there. And if we look at WTI, the products are now very closely aligned in price with very little spread between them. This just gives us another little clue worth looking at. 25, we're seeing targets here to 25, 45, 26.80. So it suggests that we might find some support around those levels, or that's the next target level to go to. Of course, if you really want to watch oil closely, the thing is the 1 minute charts. This data all coming in from Thomson Reuters Icon. Shift T on this chart, and we have downside targets. We had a downside target given last week to 27.70. We've sort of got near that this morning. 25, 35 and 26.75. So these are the downside targets, but again we've got these little mini upside targets, fairly unexciting, 29.25. Once we see a break of this trend and new upside targets forming, especially multiple targets, we might be near a low. So just that's what you need to watch. So what we can't tell you right now is where the bottom is, but what we can tell you is what to look out for, and watch those targets on your Updata charts. Keep an eye on that 60-minute cloud. It's the analysis that you have to do to get to where is the bottom. But don't be surprised to see a jump in the price at some point quite soon. But we may have lower to go before that happens. If we now look at US NatGas, NatGas on the weekly is bearish. On the daily, we're below the cloud. The seasonality at this time of year isn't great. It's normally the second quarter that we start to see a bit of bullishness in gas. If we look at the daily chart here, pulling back away from that 250 level, back to nudging $2 for Henry Hub. The 60-minute chart, of course, gives us the clue of our roadmap. When we cross through this level at around 235, that turned us into a bearish frame of mind again. We're back below the cloud. Shift T will give us the short-term targets. We had 206 given at 226. You really can't ignore these targets, given and now met. So it's really a case to looking to the 1 minute chart for the really short-term targets. If you're trading Henry Hub, get your 1 minute chart up. Shift T on your Updata system. Remember, this could be Bloomberg data, Thomson Reuters data. It doesn't matter. Updata runs with all of those products as well. And we see here 201 as the target. So at the moment, it suggests more downside for US natural gas. If we look at European gas, really starting to hit new lows again. MBP. Here we have the correlation between MBP and Brent. This is coming from Reuters. So this is your real-time OTC data, either on the Updata Energy feed or from the Trayport screen. So if you've got Trayport, you can take that real-time data from your Trayport screen and then do a correlation chart with your Reuters data. So this brings the data together for you to actually start to do this. Really valuable when you're looking at less liquid products and you want to compare a less liquid product with a more liquid product. And we see here the correlation between MBP and Brent very high at 95%. That says if oil moves, MBP moves. So that's what we've got to watch. Keeping an eye on that oil price is key. And if we see here, this is the daily chart. That's a 65-day correlation, so like a quarterly correlation. If we look at the 60-minute chart, we could do that same correlation again. But let's look at this. We're below the cloud. We're breaking to new lows here. Shift T on your Updata system will give you the trends and targets on your OTC data. Lots of gas traders across Europe using these targets, and of course on the 1 minute charts even better. 29.85, 28.95, so still further downside, somewhere between 4 and 7% downside there. Lower to go. And here we see on the 1 minute chart, again, real-time OTC data. These targets are in real time. 28.50, 28.85, 30, still got lower to go. So front month MBP has got lower to go. TTF, we see here the daily chart, that's looking pretty bearish. The 60-minute chart, here we go. Shift T gives us the trends and targets. 1285, 1245, somewhere between 2.5% and 5.5% downside. That's the targets that we have. NCG and Gaspool also looking pretty bearish, as you might expect. Gas markets across Europe off to a bad start this morning. Oil price, of course, being a major driver there, as we saw from that correlation chart. If we look at German power also falling away quite heavily this morning. We see here down 1.5%. So that's pretty key as well. This is the daily chart. What will it take for German power to be bullish again? At the moment, the cloud is pulling all the way down. So there are two options here. Either we get a very sharp recovery and we get back above 28 euros, looking unlikely, or as time goes on, this cloud pulls down to the price and we have less work to do to get through it. But looking back, we've been bearish on German power now for well over a year below the cloud. This just should put you in a bearish frame of mind. If you must go short, you need to be quick and you need to be nimble. Any counter trend move will be short-lived. We see here that on the 60-minute chart, small counter trend moves, big moves to the downside, sideways, big moves to the downside, classic staircase movement. So on this 60-minute chart, hold the shift key, press T, and we don't have any new targets here. This plus or minus down in the bottom right hand corner allows you to play with the box size, and we do still have 2285 in train, 235. But again, if you want the granularity, either on your Trayport system or the Updata energy feed, shift T. Nearly everyone trading German power is using Updata and looking at these targets. Here we see 2240 is the level, 4% downside from here. So we still have got downside there to play for. UK power falling lower below the cloud as well. Nordic power did have a little bit better week last week, but still looking pretty bearish. And if we look on the Nordic power, this is on Noodpool, we can just go shift T on our charts here. And we do have a little bit of upside potential here, thrust off the bottom. So this market might just buck the trend first. If we look at Forex, of course, one of the things that we've seen through this oil move is the strong dollar. We wrote a long-term report on the dollar at the end of last year. Big move in 2014, 20% appreciation, sideways in 2015, nudging these new highs again. Classic movement again in technical analysis. Big move up, sideways, then another big move up. So we shouldn't be surprised to see the dollar breaking to new highs. And if this is the 60-minute chart, again, this data coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, running into your Updata system. Shift T. And here we see the trends and targets. So 4% upside here, 5% upside just on those thrusts that we saw back in October. And we do have a little bit of downward pressure, a bit on a knife edge here. This target not activated though, so at the moment we'd still favour the upside there on that 60-minute chart. Remember, 60-minute chart, we're thinking what's going to happen in the days ahead. Days means weeks, weeks means months, 60-minute hours means days. So we're thinking what's going to happen in the days ahead. If we look at the euro, we're still bearish below the cloud on the euro. Massive resistance here, the sort of 1010 mark. If we look at the 60-minute chart, shift T will give us the trends and targets. We do have a little bit of upside here. Euro is really sort of in this range at the moment, so that's quite key. This 108, 110 range is pretty critical for the euro. And then of course the 1-minute chart, again coming off your Thomson Reuters Icon, the 1-minute chart, shift T, and that gives us really very, very short term. 1 minute we're thinking what's going to happen in the next few hours. Shift T again just to put the trends on there, and we see we've got a little bit of downside. So Euros has got a little bit of downward pressure at the moment. Strong dollar, weak commodities, that's what we tend to see. If we look at some other currencies, sterling had very big falls this year so far. Back to the sort of 143 level. It was hard to believe we're at 155 just a few months back. And here we see the 60-minute chart below the cloud. Just a really clear bear trend then. You only turn bullish on sterling against the dollar when we cross above that cloud. Shift T, downward target of 41.90 at the moment. Not many more selling thrusts to give us more targets there at the moment. The 1-minute charts again would give clearer targets for the very short term. Euro sterling above on the 60-minute, so euro is looking stronger than sterling. Euro Norwegian krona, much the same picture, looking stronger there. This is the 60-minute chart again. If you want to know where that's going, you're in Norway, Shift T. We'll give you the trends and targets. We have 985 as the target. That's 1.8% upside from here. Of course, quite closely aligned, the currencies there. Swiss franc, just showing a little bit of strength there on the euro against the Swiss, and then sterling Swiss, because sterling's looking so weak, is falling as well. Take a last look at stock markets. Of course, this is the really big story in the week. So we start with Asia, and of course the market that everyone's worried about at the moment is China. China actually had quite a good start to the week. It was up 0.5%. It's the one market that's actually up. So the Chinese jitters not playing today. If we look at and China is still bullish on the weekly cloud. Very hard to believe, but the lagging line is not through the cloud. Bearish on the daily and bearish on the 60-minute. No real clear downside targets here. This will give us a downside thrust target, and we do have this one here at 7% downside. Again, all this data coming from your Thomson Reuters icon system. Could be coming from Bloomberg. The choice is yours. And we have a 60-minute target here as well. So there is still potential downside in that market. If we look at Tokyo, the Japanese market was off about 1%. These are all my tracker charts, by the way. So this is my weekly, my daily, my 60-minute, my 1%, 0.5%, and 0.1% 60-minute charts. So this just gives me a long-term, medium-term and short-term view, long-term, medium-term and short-term view. This multiple time view is really important when you're looking at the market. So we do have a downside target here on the Nikkei, which is activated, but we still have an uptrend. We're still bullish on the weekly, just coming through on the price, but still bullish on the lagging line. Bearish on the daily, bearish on the 60-minute. No new 60-minute downside targets, but we do have this massive downside target here of 22%, 4%. So starting to see quite a lot of bearishness kicking in on this market with downside targets activated, upside targets as well, but we still have an uptrend. So quite a difficult call at the moment. If we look at the Indian market, the Sensex, India just starting to look a little bit worrying there on the weekly as we come through on the cloud, and on the daily we see we're below the cloud as well, so that's not great. And then the 60-minute chart we're below as well. New downside target 18% is activated. Quite a lot of downside targets activated on these emerging markets. 8% downside here, so India not looking as good at the moment. Take a look at the Aussie market, of course, a very heavily resource-laden market, and we see here that we're through on the weekly, that's bearish, through on the daily, that's bearish, through on the 60-minute, that's also bearish. So the Australian market looking pretty bearish. 5.8% downside here, 9% downside on the 0.5% chart, and short-term downside target. So Australia not looking good at all. If we take a look at European markets, we'll start with the DAX. You'll notice here that I click on the DAX price and all the charts change. These are my tracker charts. DAX is still just bullish on the weekly, bearish on the daily, bearish on the 60-minute. Note the support here, the long-term support. We're really nudging that at the moment. There is a lot of support there for the DAX, so maybe we will just find support at these levels. We do have downside pressures here kicking in, downside targets as much as 15% downside there as well. Take a look at the FTSE. On the FTSE we see here that we're bearish on the weekly, very similar to the Australian chart here, bearish on the weekly, bearish on the daily, bearish on the 60-minute. Of course, FTSE, very resource-laden, a lot of oil and gas companies in the large caps, mining stocks as well. So this is really having an impact on the FTSE. Downside targets now activated with this recent move. We've seen these downside targets activated on the 1% chart. 12% downside is the first one we look to, 6%, 12%, so there's still more downside on the FTSE, and we're seeing here downside potential as well, and on the 60-minute chart we're seeing quite a bit of downside as well. So not a great picture. Now it's over to the US stock market. We'll start with the S&P 500. The S&P, of course, probably the most important index in the world. just starting to come through on the weekly, and we really don't want to see that happening for a few weeks. So we need to bounce at these levels. If we stay at these levels for much longer, then that starts to say long-term downtrend, and that's a bit worrying. On the daily chart, we're through, so that's bearish, and on the 60-minute chart, we're through. This downside target not yet activated. We need a move below the sort of 1860 level to activate that. A close below that level would activate that. So we're pretty close to that now, and then we have got the tram lines here, so that is the support, and we see here right now that we are right on support. And of course, these are the lows that we saw in August last year, and September we had lows. Those lows being tested at the moment, so that's really critical. We're bearish below, let's say, 1850, and we're bullish above 2150. This 300-point range we're in at the moment, really super critical. No short-term downside target, so we do take a little bit of heart from that. And then if we take a look at the NASDAQ, NASDAQ tends to lead the FTSE. NASDAQ is staying bullish at the moment. We're above the cloud here quite clearly on the lagging line and on the price, finding support on the cloud at the moment. Through on the daily, a few more days at these levels and we'd be a bit worried, and that sort of 4400 level is pretty critical on the NASDAQ 100. Here we see on the 60-minute chart we're bearish below the cloud. A lot of support again here. Downside target met, so that's not great. That's bearish confirmation, and we do have a new downside target, a further 18% downside, which is activated. I weighted down on some of my NASDAQ stocks last week and the week before, and I think, with this bearish picture emerging, we just have to be a bit careful. We shouldn't be surprised though with this long-term trend to see a buying bottom, much like we did in August, but at the same time we need to be careful. Very difficult to call until we get some clarity on the trend. Of course, across through this 60-minute chart on this cloud, that would give us some confidence that the markets were starting to bottom and recover. But at the moment, we're on a bit of a knife edge. That's it for this week. Watch the markets quite carefully. Until next week, happy charting. See you then.